actually give a round of applause to all the speakers again, including Norm and Gail, who stood in his place. So I have been taking notes from all the talks. They're all great, and I think there are a few things that I identified that are a common theme regarding the challenges that we are thinking about and also the opportunities. There are definitely questions about how a surface network could probe at depth physics. So this is something probably we need to talk about more. The other question is how close we need to be from the fault in order to capture these inelastic processes and the unusual Gauss motion characteristics that Gail and others have pointed to. And then even, I think the more pressing question is how to address the time scale issue, because as Bill mentioned, we may put the network in a place that will never get an earthquake that is large enough or rich enough that can answer the physics question we are interested in. So perhaps we need to be even more ambitious than the initial plan for RuFZO and try to monitor many faults in the same time in the hope that we can capture these events. But of course, there were other questions, like other suggestions relating that learning from small earthquakes would also be very beneficial. And perhaps one thing, and because I also have gone through some sort of a personal transformation by looking into the Turkey earthquakes, as Bill mentioned, for a seismometer, it was very exciting to use a ruler to measure the rupture speed. For a mechanician, it was also quite surprising that this is a case where you can apply textbook equations from fracture mechanics to learn about fracture energy, to learn about the rupture speed and so on. But on a more practical issue, and I think this is something that might have been not studied extensively, and I'm a modeler too, is we usually tend to decouple source and size, source and path effects. And the reason is perhaps we are interested in Los Angeles, the San Andreas passes by, it sends waves, and then the side effect would be local to this area, but the source would probably be governed by what's happening at depth. But what happens, like for example, in Turkey, that a densely populated area was right above the fault trace, right? Especially in the south where most of the damage happened. If I look at Hayward Fault in California, that's just going through a densely populated area as well. In that case, it's not that easy to decouple the small scale, shallow physics from what's happening at depth. In fact, these things that we can map from the surface will still kind of affecting the source and being transferred deeper. And then there is this feedback that we haven't studied extensively yet. So these are some comments that I have, and I would like this opportunity to open just in the next maybe 20 minutes, open the floor for discussion, and would like to hear more challenges and what we should be aware of and what we should be looking for in order to make this more successful than that we are on board. On board is great, but I would like to hear more concerns from the people and more suggestions related to how to make this better.
So I'm not in the norm. I want to switch gear.
Okay.
I've only heard about seismometers and GSs, but I was thinking about what about groundwater hydrology? I mean, in thinking about side effects, I think about side effects of wave propagation in a complex media, with maybe the PD and be well understood. There's still waves propagating in a medium. So I would just characterize the medium and its complexity to really understand side effects as in the physics sense of how waves propagate. But that medium shallow earth structure, there is a lot with groundwater levels changing a lot. You guys had a lot of rain this year, I heard. Yeah, who would know that?
Not in Illinois.
And so, but I'm just thinking, what if we actually also instrumented groundwater levels near waterfalls to characterize the surface waters? What if there were some EM surveys to look at porosity in the subsurface, close to the fault, far from the fault? But anyway, some thoughts that are non-seismological.
I think this is great because fluid effects are very important at different scales, different depths, and fluctuations with the groundwater could be detected by tomographical changes, right, in the shear wave and P wave speeds, and that gives us an idea about also changing properties of the medium that feeds back into the rupture process as well as the ground motion. But anybody who would have more knowledge of the ground motion and fluid effects like liquefactions, etc., could chime in as well. This is another thing that we have seen in the Turkey earthquakes too, that there are liquefactions events very close by to the fault surface, and something of an sort of an open question is, because usually when my geotechnical engineer colleagues study liquefaction, they apply some sort of a ground motion, but liquefaction itself hasn't been also studied extensively in the context of earthquake rupture physics as well. Like how is the wave in the near field, like if it's a Mach cone due to a super shear, or it's just the regular wave field with sub-Rayleigh rupture, how is that going to trigger, say, liquefaction or landslide? This is something that's not studied extensively.
It's a really good point. And again, another opportunity to bring in the geotechnical engineering community, because that is obviously another great application for RuFZO, is looking in more detail about the whole process of liquefaction.
On a slightly different topic, I'd like to go back to Ramon's comment about rapidly documenting the surface rupture. Tonight in my talk this afternoon, I'm going to talk about an earthquake, the RuFZO earthquake, and show you how difficult it was to determine the difference between coseismic and post-seismic slip. And in fact, there's so much post-seismic slip that if you look at scaling relationships at earthquakes, stands out because people measure the offset weeks to months later, and most of that's post-seismic slip. And so 2 points I want to make is, one, we really need to rapidly get out there to measure that. And then the other good thing about that is you could have a LiDAR drone in a warehouse somewhere, and you don't have to know where the next rupture is. You just have to be ready to go get it.
So looking at this map, right, and these cross sections, I think it would be really important to have some studies that ask, how many, what's the spacing of these needs to be versus how many instruments for a cross section, right? Because, as exciting as it is to use these recordings as a ruler to get rupture speed, right? As Bill Ellsworth pointed out, in his wonderful talk pointed out, right? We have a dense network already, right? And I'm pretty sure with the current method, we will be able to get an average rupture speed without this network, right? So this network is really there to do other things, right? That people were talking about, in the sense of capturing things locally, capturing the inelasticity, capturing the structure, the ground motion, the variability in it. And is it possible with 6 instruments per site, which is, there was small sub diagram, which is not currently there, or however many seismic instruments, right? Do we need 16?
Sure.
So some presentations had like 10 to 20, and then they said maybe these need to be longer or something. So would the button network be 3 times less dense and 3 times more instruments per site, or what, right? Like, I think it depends on the question. So I really think, as exciting as rupture speed is, I think that would be no.
No, I think yes. No, I think this is a great point, and this is where there's an opportunity, especially for models, to try to answer these questions. Like, for example, you are talking here in absolute that 2 to 5 kilometers is the near fault region, right? But this is probably related to some more fundamental length scale in the rupture process that could vary from one fault to another. So even how wide you will distribute these instruments would vary from one place to another. And then there are Bayesian techniques that allow you to do experimental optimal design, as Alice mentioned, and this could come up with answers specific. Maybe in some places we need some irregular spacing denser than others, and some other places we can just have wider one. So this is important question that will govern how this is going to evolve, right? And it could be staged as well, right? And I think one thing, as Yehuda mentioned, perhaps this was the initial thinking, but it's not the binding design. And more importantly, now with the expansion, again, I think faults that run through densely populated areas like Hayward fault could really be even more urgent in order to instrument to some extent, because this is where the local effects are really important for hazard and also kind of governing the physics. This is a way taken.
To follow up on Nadia's point of instrumentation, during the discussion we talked about complexities of the problem structures and all the instruments on this map, which you could have designed, having instruments on the fault, right? So the recorded signal will be a superposition of everything, and there is a lack of a clean view or a base view. So I wonder what folks think about having some awful smaller scale arrays on hard rock or simple structures that would be able to provide a baseline of the source, and then we can start from there, add on complexities later by layer.
Right. Well, that would mean extending each of these lines off the fold into structured things, yes.
Right, but not necessarily just a line, right? So I want to have a smaller aperture arrays, which has different sensitivities regarding frequency complex.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing that's helpful in terms of the length of these lines is, at least from a ground motion perspective, we tend to think in log distances. So you have lots of instruments that are really close to the fault, but then, you know, if you're stepping out in log distance, that spacing can get broader. So you may be able to go out further than you otherwise would with not so many instruments.
Peter?
Yeah, so the original proposal we had the monitoring side, but then we also had a characterizing phase. So we would go in before or after these networks are in, and we can put a dense array in for a month or two. And would that quantify what you're offering? Because you can cover a larger area with more sensors, but for a short time, just to get a benchmark.
Yeah, so I think not. I like the lines, but I think we need a more complex geometry in terms of the risk design, so we can see a variety of processes.
Yeah.
Actually, so just to follow up on that, while the earthquake is happening, I think this is very much, you cannot do it before or after, right? While the earthquake is happening, you have the source and you have the path and you have the instrument response, and all of that will be super complicated, but potentially at the location of these sensors, right? Do you understand that?
Yes.
So you want some simpler things, right? Some sensors in the hard rock, right? So that some complexities are gone and you can infer stuff. Yeah, well, that's the idea, right?
Yes, I agree.
So all the suggestions are great, and of course, the more the better, but then the budget is going to be limited. So I just want everybody to remember that this is not done in vacuum. I want you to remember that there are great networks, regional networks. Bill showed them. As Gail pointed out, if you zoom in, you see there's really nothing around the faults. There are also off-fault 2D arrays like Pinion Flat. Not to say that we don't need more, but A, I'm saying it's not in a vacuum. B, the real importance, and I also agree, we don't know when the next earthquakes will occur. We have no idea. We always are surprised. But it is really the biggest fault structures that produce the largest hazard. And when we put arrays first on those biggest fault structures statewide, we can get multi-scale structural models. So another part of the fact that this is not done in vacuum is that this is data-driven, but it will be combined with simulations while we are waiting for bigger earthquakes. And the simulations need multi-scale velocity structures. We already have a fairly good, not perfect, but good regional velocity models. The missing information on smaller scale is around the faults, right? So there is, I'm all for, the more the better. Everything we do is great, but keep in mind what we already have. Keep in mind, what the biggest targets are. Norm Stock, which was given very well by Gail, really hit many of those points very well.
Sure. I want to ask back to Yehuda, and this is really I'm asking completely ignorantly, who would scream if we removed half the lines and put them somewhere else? This is like totally ignorant question. But like, if the project is like twice as likely to succeed because it has.
Nobody will scream, this is modular by design, modular. So eventually, at some point, I envision out of some few more workshops, we'll write a proposal.
Yeah.
We will get some budget, it will be finite. You know, we will put a few,
No.
now there's always more to do, but the idea is that whatever we put on the ground, Parkfield is a very good example for this. You put something on the ground and it becomes an attractor for more. So nobody will scream if you move around this. It's just nothing, everything is in flux and open to improvements.
I have two comments. The first one was, I think we've talked about this on and off, but there's no, in this, I know it's just a kind of a sketch, but there's nothing around the creeping section of the central San Andreas or in the Salt Trough where there's some creep, and some of the questions could be answered by observations near those creeping faults, I think, and at least we know the signal, we know they're slipping, and so that could be interesting and a place to begin, especially central San Andreas, because it could be close to or combined with Parkfield. That's just one comment. And then the other one was it's maybe a little bit more naive, but the balance, the kind of fault maturity. So, these main arrays are on the big faults, which are the ones we expect to happen earthquakes most highest probability, which makes sense, but they're also, especially the San Andreas, is a really mature fault where it probably has a very distinct kind of damage zone. And Alice's talk made me think, well, the fracture network might be quite different around in this mature, highly damaged fault core relative to these really immature structures in the Mojave, and having a chance to explore that parameter space with the RuFZO would be really nice. It's just hard to know which of the immature faults are going to break next.
Yeah, I just have one additional question, and maybe it just comes back to budget, but I'm kind of curious why there's the point above this map is not being considered, although we have to say the triple junction.
We could make it disappear.
Surprises. I mean,
so
and also, the triple junction is complex. It's young. It's got a lot of activity.
Exactly.
Magnitude. Years in there.
Yeah.
is this your comment or you wanted to?
Yeah, I was gonna make similar sort of recommendations geographically that I think, especially in light of all of the presentations that we heard, talk a lot about the value of smaller earthquakes, and it behooves us in thinking about the distribution of these stations and arrays, to think about where we're just going to be capturing the most seismicity. And there are certain faults that I think come across with a good balance of high probabilities of large events, while also having like the state's most seismicity, right? So the San Jacinto fault is very busy. The Calaveras fault has magnitude 5 or 6 earthquakes like once a decade. So your likelihood of capturing these is high, plus it's creeping. So you've got this variety of behaviors, tons of seismicity, also pretty large earthquakes. And so focusing on faults that balance those different needs and are particularly going to capture a lot of earthquakes.
And I think these are all very reasonable, and again I believe that this initial design is not binding, and definitely I myself have comments and recommendations on it, and I know everybody here would have a similar thing. So in fact, putting at other faults would also be quite rewarding. And
also 2 quick comments. Maybe the first one is, would this be somehow designed in a way that everybody would scream if one part was removed? And thinking about, how can you make a case that we really need these complementary observations to learn more, right? That we need more than one Parkfield observatory. And yeah, that would really link more into looking into, why are earthquakes always surprising? That's a very big question. But how could we make a case that we need all of this? We need all of this data in different places, and if you remove one piece, we will not have the same outcome. And the second point is in terms of budget, just a comment, modeling is cheap. So that from the beginning. beginning and maybe complement some of the things that we can't argue that we do need to have continuously instrumented. We could complement that at least with continuous modeling efforts to make up for some of the lack of the data.
You're right, money is very cheap if you have it.
So to address the money question a little bit, one of the things that I'm taking away is there are kind of two buckets for the science questions. Some of them are much more engineering oriented than science oriented. And I wonder if whether EAR is the right target or the only target in NSF. It seems like discussions with the engineering director are going to be important. And in parallel, having discussions with the state of California, the CSPIT program is going to continue to install instruments. It seems like talking with them is going to be essential because you need, I think you need more than one partner here. And think about broadening what you're doing. You've got a lot of good ideas to sell and take advantage of that in terms of looking at more than just one target like we need more.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion.
I'll follow up on that funding just a little bit too. My name is Tim Cockrell, University of Texas Advanced Computing Center. Lots of emails from me. I support your research. I'm not a researcher. I'm at the Supercomputing Center there. Frontier is like mine. Well, So there's 200 of us in tech, and we all say it's our. So Mike, Alice, Agnes, Yifan, Kwei, with CyberShake, everybody uses our especially the large computing bolts. We were characteristic science applications for the next computer beyond Frontier, which would be 10 times more capable. Mike, Alice, Agnes, CyberShake are all on that list. So anyway, we're here for you for a long time. Letters of collaboration, following up on what Maggie said, very important to make sure you're leveraging other money. We have, a $1 billion project coming up with the LCCF. Leverage us, letter of collaboration, right, to support all of your simulation work. NERI Design Safe, Natural Hazards Engineering Research Infrastructure, also a large facility project with NSF. There's another one, get a letter of collaboration from us. Many things we can do to collaborate. The NERI Rapid facility for going out in the field, they've got your drone, right? They've got all the equipment to get out there and do that. The EERs, the Extreme Events Reconnaissance Group, in addition to gear, lots of other ones now. Already funded, leverage other projects, right? And I'm on the advisory, I'll be writing this up for SCEC at the end of the meeting as well. But you go over $100 million, you're now in a large facility instead of an MSRI. Okay, so those take at least 4 years of multiple rounds of proposal review. TAC is through that for the leadership class of the facility. Thank you to those of you that are contributing for that as well. And so now we just need the money, and we expect that in early 2024 to build out this next big system. But if you want to build a much bigger system and roll all these ideas together, there is a funding issue. Be careful about that $100 million. MSRI, you can put together pretty quickly, get it going, and put it in. I don't think you want to, based on what I saw on the probabilistic stuff there, when Bill pushed out that timeline from 2004, I don't think you want to wait 4 years to get an answer of whether or not you're going to get funded. So be careful about $100 million.
Yeah, this is a weird thing to say, but because these things are really slow, it is probably the early career people in this room that are going to be using this data and doing things with it down the line. So if the earthquake doesn't happen where we put the array, we're the ones that scream. And I think in terms of getting early career people involved in decision making, there is a big information gap. I have no idea what a nodal array costs. I have no idea the actual the 10 million available versus the individual costs of these things. So it makes it really hard to think about the actual infrastructure and how to couple that with the scientific goals we may have. And I wonder if there's a way of filling that information gap so we can be more involved with the decision making. I think what Bill was doing with this talk helps do that for us.
This is great because this is actually, you are just a couple of minutes away from closing, and then I hear that this could be a good topic for a workshop, right? A virtual workshop that we can get, especially early career people who are interested in this, and try to get their feedback and input on this, and also kind of a training opportunity to learn about these terminologies and challenges and so on. And I think we should But I also hear from this discussion that the design definitely needs further iterations. So this is probably another topic that we should think of, and also strategically addressing different funding opportunities beyond earth science would be another. So yeah. If there's no other final comments.
One very quick one, and that is, I think that, yeah, early career people are the ones who should be driving where the design of these things, where the instruments are, and what they want to measure, because it's a very valid point. It's the early career people that are going to be making use of these data. So the question is, what data do they want to have 10 years from now?
But I think it's really important, coupled to that, before we can give input that's actually useful, we need training so that we can give the inputs. I think before an input workshop, there needs to be a information delivery workshop.
Right.
Yeah. Great.
Good point.
So thank you all for making this a very successful meeting.